Alright, well, this one is for the classic horror movie buffs out there. I myself am not a horror movie buff. I watched this really ridiculous 80s horror movie a long time ago called The Blob. Literally just about a blob of goo that ate people, like an evil flubber before CGI. It traumatized me. I threw out all my Play-Doh, couldn't eat mashed potatoes, and even stopped going to my med school lectures. Anyway, I missed the whole horror movie boat. So this scene is called Screamatodes 3, Return of the Flesh Eaters. And unlike our superhero team of nematodes who represented nematodes that affect the GI tract, these guys are behind the scenes in the tissue. Without further ado, let's introduce our first star over here, getting some refreshments. It's Dracula, played by the preeminent method actor Dracunculus metanesis. I'll just call him Dracula Unculus. So infection with this guy occurs by drinking contaminated water, which we'll represent with our water cooler here. And this water happens to contain copepods, which are teeny tiny crustaceans found in the sea and fresh water. So let's add a stack of paper cups to the side of the water cooler with a fun copepod design. Instead of copepods, now think cupipods. These are considered the intermediate hosts because they contain the parasitic larvae which penetrate the host's stomach and intestinal wall once the copepods die. Then, after maturation in the abdominal cavity, the females migrate to the surface of the skin, usually on the lower extremities, and produce a painful skin ulcer. So how do you make the diagnosis? Well, literally, you've got worms coming out of someone's skin, so it's pretty clear something's going on. Notice how Draculunculus's shoelaces are untied and emerging from red holes in his shoes? This is kind of what the worms would look like when they're coming out of their red ulcers. To treat this disease, you'd slowly extract the worm with a small stick, like a matchstick. In order to do this, you'd sit there, coax the worm out, and then over a period of days, you'd twist the stick slowly until it was completely out. It's thought that this is what's inspired the rod of Asclepius, which has been adopted as a symbol of medicine. See, it's the small things that count. We're so focused on gamma knife, stereotactic radiosurgery, and targeted gene therapy, but really, what impresses people is slowly pulling long worms out of someone's foot. So to depict this treatment, we've wrapped his shoelace around the leg of this water cooler. You can make this process go faster with metronidazole, but no amount of garlic, holy water, or crosses will help you get rid of this Draculunculus. Well, look who snuck up on set and is up to his usual mischief. It's Phil with his EO slingshot shooting little pink granules at Dracunculus. Poor guy. If you've seen the intestinal nematode video, you should know now that Phil, by night, is EO slingshot boy. And he's here to remind us that Dracunculus can cause peripheral eosinophilia. Alright, we're on to our next star now, and it's this Kafka-esque evolved fly, also known as Onchocerca volvulus. Oh, and just a high-yield, everyday life tip, if you want to sound smart, just say a dead European guy's name and add esque afterwards. Kafka-esque, Franco-esque. And if you can't think of any dead European guys' names, just stick to the Ninja Turtles. Anyway, a type of Michelangelo-esque black flies are often found around rivers in Africa, Central America, and South America. The black fly bites the human host and deposits its larvae in the skin. These larvae penetrate down into the skin and mature into adults. The adults produce microfilariae, which then migrate throughout the body. The physical signs of this infection are scattered pruritic papules, which can later become hyperpigmented. Hypopigmented spots can also occur, usually on the shins of older patients, and we'll represent this oncodermatitis by putting some dark and light chemical stains on this scientist's lab coat and pants. And sometimes, one of these little microfilariae will float into the eyeball and cause blindness. That's why this disease is also known as river blindness. In fact, it's the second most common cause of infectious blindness after trachoma. Remember that pirate with those 2 eye patches from the chlamydia sketch? To remind you that blindness is a major complication, Notice that our fly has a human hand covering his eyes. He just doesn't want to face the reality that he's turning into a disgusting fly. And don't forget that this parasite too can cause eosinophilia. So we'll draw in some stray pink granules here on the floor. And what's a laboratory without a microscope? So we'll draw in a microscope on this lab bench to remind you actually of the diagnosis, which would be to see microfilaria on a skin biopsy under the microscope. So how do you treat this bug? The treatment is ivermectin, which, as you know from the intestinal nematode video, is what we call rivermectin. So we'll add this no dumping drains to river to remind you of rivermectin. Our next actress, relaxing offset, is Witcheria Bancrofti, playing the witch. Witcheria Bancrofti sounds kind of like witchcraft. And what's more witch-like than turning someone into an elephant? Well, this parasite causes elephantiasis, and we've illustrated this by drawing her wearing these large MC Hammer-esque pants to remind you of elephantiasis. For those of you who don't watch the Discovery Channel, elephantiasis is a complication of long-standing lower extremity lymphedema, which makes your legs and other body parts literally look like those of an elephant. It goes into the lymphatics and causes inflammation and disruption of the lymphatic system. So we've also drawn her with a ruffled collar and ruffles around the armpits to further solidify lymphadenopathy. And also you'll notice that she's coughing, maybe from practicing that witch's cackle for too long. Or maybe it's because Witcheria Bancrofti infection leads to microfilariae that travel to the lungs and cause a hypersensitivity reaction that's making our witch cough. So how do you get this infection? Well, a mosquito acts as the intermediate host, which is why we have mosquitoes flying around her. And then when these mosquitoes bite, they deposit larvae on the skin. These larvae penetrate the skin, enter the lymphatics, where they produce microfilariae, and to make the diagnosis, you do a thick blood smear to see the organisms. And what do you know? She's got a thick smear of blood on her hat. Probably the blood of a farm girl and her little dog. And once again, to remember eosinophilia, we'll draw some more stray granules around the witch. Alright, and now for treatment. And it's a unique treatment. It's called diethylcarbamazine. And to help you remember this, during her breaks between takes, our witch is reading Diet and Carb Magazine for some expert health tips. Diet and Carb Magazine or diethylcarbamazine. Truly a Hollywood diva. And what's a horror film without a wolfman? Our wolfman is starring Toxocara canis. So Toxocara canis is transmitted from contamination of food with dog or cat feces, or perhaps even wolf feces. And here we have some dog feces in a stinky poop bag. At least the wolfman is conscientious enough to clean up after himself. So the thing that makes Toxocara different is when the parasitic larvae get inside the human, they never actually mature out of the larva stage and continue to circulate the body, which can go on for years. That's why a name for this disease is visceral larva migrans. And if the larva gets to the eye, it's called ocular larva migrans, and it can cause blindness, which we'll represent with him wearing his sleep mask eye covers. And did I mention eosinophilia? No one's safe from Phil's slingshot. So here's the pink eosinophilia granules. Notice as the wolfman is leaning back and snoozing in his chair, the metal legs are bending under his weight. These bent metal bars should remind you of albendazole, the treatment for toxocariasis. And we've saved the best for last. It's creepy, slimy, and lurks in the swamp. It's the swamp creature from the Loa Loa Lagoon. So as the Loa Loa worm migrates through the subcutaneous tissue of its host, it causes transient angioedema. Angioedema with a fancy name. The localized subcutaneous swellings are referred to as calabar swellings, and we'll show them here by putting these lumps all over the creature's arms and legs. The adult worm can migrate to the eye and can actually be seen crawling beneath the conjunctiva, causing transient inflammation and edema. And if you look closely, really closely, you can see a worm wriggling across this creature's eyeball. It's so famous for doing this that Loa Loa is also called African eyeworm. So besides seeing these worms crawl across the eye, another way to make the diagnosis is to perform a blood smear. And we'll represent this by smearing blood across his face after he must have eaten one of the helpless swamp explorers. And if you're not already terrified of getting bitten by flies in Africa, this is another one that you can add to that list, as it's transmitted by deer flies, which you can see surrounding him. And of course, it also causes eosinophilia, so we'll draw in the last of the stray granules from Phil's EO slingshot. So finally, how do you treat Loa Loa? Well, the swamp creature may not be that attractive, so he is trying to work on his figure, and he's catching up on his favorite health magazine. And look at that, it's also Diet and Carb Magazine, for diethylcarbamazine. And you'll also notice that the legs of his chair are bending too, and that's, of course, for albendazole. Now I understand why he's reading that diet magazine. Lay off the swamp turtles. Well, that's all we got. This video is so Raphael-esque, how he got so much done in one scene. You know what I mean? Wow, that just sounded so smart. Well, that's it. There's a lot here, so definitely maybe check it out again. But for now, let's take 5, shall we?